Hello and welcome to the West Asia Post. I am Ghadi Francis and this is our weekly show where we bring you all things new West Asia. This week has been a flurry of diplomacy for this region. Olive branches were extended, international assemblies were addressed, and a simmering hope for regional peace persists. We have a big lineup for you in this episode, but first, let's take a look at the headlines. Syrian President Bashar al-Assad is in China on a state visit, first such visit in over 20 years, as Damascus seeks financial support to rebuild the devastated country. Iranian parliament passes controversial hijab bill, which will effectively increase fines and prison terms for women flouting the dress code norms. Women can now be jailed up to 10 years under the new rule. In a rare interview with Western press, Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman says the kingdom's ties with Israel are improving every day, but Palestine remains the sticking point. Turkish central bank raises key lending rate to 30%, marking a 20-year high. Top bankers seemingly turning towards Erdogan's conventional economics route. Leaders of over 140 countries gathered in New York for the 78th United Nations General Assembly. Now, this week saw a slew of conversations, addresses, questions, and remarks about global conflicts. In the following report, we put a spotlight on what the leaders of the most volatile region who participated in the forum said. Watch the story for takeaways on what West Asia had to say to the world.
All eyes were on the UN General Assembly held in New York. More than 140 nations attended a high-level week of debates. Amid issues of global conflict, the most volatile region's stability was also in the spotlight. West Asian leaders addressed a multitude of issues plaguing their home ground. Fingers were pointed, allegations levied, but at the end of it all, countries found strong common ground, peace in their home. Several nations raised the Palestinian issue. As the region scrambles under Israeli occupation, a two-nation solution is a unanimous demand, and what many peg as the key to stability in West Asia.
Those who think that peace can prevail in the Middle East without the Palestinian people enjoying their full legitimate and national rights would be delusional.
We believe
that relationships between countries in the region and the Zionist regime would be a stab in the back of the Palestinian people and the Palestinian resistance.
Interestingly, many meetings on the sidelines of the UNGA also grabbed eyeballs. Iran's President Ibrahim Raisi engaging with a group of ultra-Orthodox anti-Zionist Jews. The key point of discussion? Iran's stand to protect the Jewish community.
Anti-Zionist Jews here, and this is a great thing. And in this morning's...
While Raisi may have extended an olive branch to the Jews, he was engulfed in a slew of allegations, primarily for Iran's interference in Yemen's long-drawn conflict. Iran has been accused of supporting and harboring Houthi rebels in Yemen, as the latter has been fighting Saudi-led coalition forces since 2015.
Again, we call on the international community to condemn the blatant Iranian interference in our country's affairs and turning it into a platform for a cross-border threat, and to subject it to the sanctions adopted in accordance with international legitimacy resolutions related to the Yemeni issue.
Meanwhile, Saudi Arabia has taken monumental steps to negotiate a ceasefire with the Houthis.
With regard to the inflow of basic foodstuffs and aid, and also roads need to be opened near Taiz, the third country of the city of the country which has been under siege for so long.
The past year has seen categorical changes in West Asia. As talks around normalization ties take center stage, leaders put forth a united front on wanting a peaceful and stable region.
Now, this meeting has been on the cards for a long time, for months now. While the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has a long old friendship with his US counterpart, Benjamin Netanyahu is visiting Joe Biden for the first time since he came to power. Now, in spite of all this, all did not seem well, as this New York visit for Benjamin Netanyahu was engulfed by a chorus of judicial overhaul protests. We tell you more in this report.
Benjamin Netanyahu's diplomatic dry spell with the US has come to an end. The Israeli Prime Minister finally got a chance to sit down with his old friend Joe Biden. Israel and Saudi's normalization ties was high on the agenda for both leaders.
I think that under your leadership, Mr. President, we can forge a historic peace between Israel and Saudi Arabia. And I think such a peace would go a long way, first to advance the end of the Arab-Israeli conflict, achieve reconciliation between the Islamic world and the Jewish state, and advance a genuine peace between Israel and the Palestinians. This is something within our reach.
But as Netanyahu speaks of regional reconciliation, a domestic crisis plagues his own country. Protests against judicial overhaul have marred the democratic conditions of Israel to such an extent that Joe Biden made sure to bring it up with his longtime ally.
I think without Israel, there's not a Jew in the world that's secure. I think Israel is essential. And I look forward to discussing all of this with you and working together with your team to fulfill those.
Joe Biden is not the only one who's pushing Netanyahu to uphold the democratic values in his country. From the moment he boarded his plane, to the minute he stepped foot in the United States, the Israeli leader's visit has been shadowed by protests. While two old friends held their long overdue meeting, demonstrators thronged the streets of New York and California.
We are fighting to make sure that Israel identity is not changing from a liberal democracy into a messianic theocracy. When Prime Minister Netanyahu and his government, which elected them legitimately, are changing the rules of law, and want to diminish the judiciary, it means that we are going to turn into a dictatorship. So we Israeli Americans and Jewish Americans are standing by our brothers and sisters in the hundreds of thousands who take in the streets to make sure that Israel stays democracy.
I came out because I love Israel. I've spent much time there, and I want it to be a democratic country, and I fear that with what Netanyahu is trying to do, that it is going to lapse into non-democracy.
Joe Biden has extended a state visit invite to Israel's leader, promising to host him at the White House before the year's end. But in no uncertain terms, Washington's message is clear to Netanyahu. Protect the democratic values of Israel. Even though the Prime Minister may have scored a diplomatic point, the unrest back home shows no signs of slowing down. The far-right leader is at the epicenter of a litmus test. How far does he go to curtail judicial powers in his own country? Will it play a major role in shaping his image as a global leader, more so as the poster boy of peace and normalization in West Asia?
Now to the most controversial part of West Asia, Iran. The complicated US-Iran relationships saw a rare human moment this week as both set a group of prisoners free. But in the backdrop of the tearful reunions, the ties remain just as bleak. Now Washington is set to keeping Tehran miles away from nuclear power. And on the other hand, Iran has an array of diplomatic tricks up its sleeve. The next report brings you more details.
Tears of joy, relief, and hugs as 5 American prisoners reunited with their families after years of isolation, agony, and confinement. These are dual Iranian-American citizens who had been languishing in prisons in Iran for years.
Amazing, it's amazing, unfreaking believable. We're so grateful to be together after 8 years. It's unbelievable. Almost 8 years to the day. It's unbelievable. We're so grateful. It's just, you feel like it's a dream. The nightmare is finally over.
On the other hand, the United States also released 5 Iranian prisoners. Only 2 of them have agreed to return to their country. This was part of a prisoner swap that the 2 countries agreed to. Washington also released frozen Iranian funds in South Korean banks. The funds, worth $6 billion, have now been transferred to Doha.
Begging diplomacy in front of America has never worked, and this dignified method has made us proud.
While this may seem like a major breakthrough, cracks in Iran-US diplomatic ties persist. America released the funds as a concession to Iran for its prisoners, but that by no means indicates a patch-up in strained relations. In fact, the day the prisoner swap happened, US slapped fresh sanctions on Iran.
There are a lot of terrible things happening day in, day out around the world. But there's something so profoundly callous and inhumane about this practice of ripping people from their lives, from their families, from their loved ones, to use them as political pawns.
Sanctions included censoring Iran's intelligence and security ministry and the former President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad for backing the ministry involved in detention of US citizens. The US action can be explained through a phenomenon called Iran's hostage diplomacy. Experts have cited that Iran keeps dual nationals hostage and then uses them to gain bargaining chips from Western nations. Iran mostly claims these citizens are spies. A UN inquiry has been asked to intervene in Iran's growing use of detention to gain concessions. The inquiry is due to report in March 2024. According to Free Nazanin campaign, a UK campaign which worked for the release of the British Iranian citizen, there are about 30 dual nationals in Iran's prisons. The campaign group claims that there is evidence of growing ties between Iranian intelligence and organized criminal gangs across Europe. The relationship allegedly grew from Iran's attempt to abduct individuals from Europe. Experts say Iran is gradually moving towards execution diplomacy, where if Iran's conditions are not agreed upon, it will execute the dual nationals. In making humans bargaining chips, Iran is setting a horrifying and dangerous precedent.
Yeah, he was on me like a... You guys followed.
Now, last week saw a flurry of meetings between Yemen's Houthi rebels and the Saudi leadership. A first publicly announced visit has come to an end. Now, Saudi says that ceasefire talks have made progress, but the Yemenis have been waiting for peace for 8 years now. Now, the question is a stable future anywhere in Yemen's destiny? This report brings you details.
Eight years of simmering conflict. 8 years of spiraling humanitarian crisis in Yemen. A coalition of military forces led by Saudi Arabia has been fighting Yemen's Houthi rebels since 2015. Statements were released. World leaders indulged in lip service, but nothing changed.
حياته في المتارس والخنادق باليأس أو بالانهزام رغبا.
For 8 years, West Asian nations have remained engulfed in a long-drawn proxy war fueled by the West.
We share a concern about Yemen and the need to restore a functioning government that is inclusive and that can relieve the humanitarian situation there.
On average, a child under the age of 5 dies of preventable causes in Yemen every 10 minutes. And this means 50 children in Yemen will die during today's conference, and all those deaths could have been prevented. Many of the children who survive will be affected by stunting and poor health for their entire lives. We are witnessing the starving and the crippling of an entire generation. We must act now to save lives.
Of course, we've also been talking about Hodeidah and also about Taiz. These are two major population zones in Yemen caught in war. I'm hopeful that we can reach agreements on the de-escalation to reduce the fighting in both places. I'm hoping that we can. We're not there yet.
Long-drawn proxy war fueled by the West. But now, two warring sides want peace in their home. Steps have been taken towards ceasefire negotiations. In the first ever publicly announced visit to Saudi, Houthi leaders went to Riyadh to reach a truce agreement. What followed was 5 days of back and forth between the two sides. Since the visit ended on 20th September, little information has been released about the outcome of this meeting. It seems the Saudi Foreign Ministry is happy. It welcomed the so-called positive results on the serious discussions for a roadmap to peace in Yemen. But no more has been said. Talks were last held in April. Houthi leaders had welcomed a Saudi delegation to the conflict-torn region of Sana'a. Another round of negotiations in less than 6 months now. And yet, no joint statement or plan of action for ceasefire. So the questions persist. Is there real progress? For how long will the people of Yemen continue to suffer? When will the war finally come to an end? There's great onus on Saudi Arabia's shoulders. The country is leaving no stone unturned on the diplomatic front in emerging as a regional leader, a domestic catalyst of peace efforts in West Asia. The sands are quickly shifting in the region. But the clock ticks away, and Yemen's fate is yet to be sealed.
For years now, Syria has been ravaged by war. The dire humanitarian conditions, time and again, month after month, year after year, have been discussed, analyzed, and debated. But still, the conditions remain indescribable. It's a homeland marred by conflict, a failing economy, and no respite in sight. At the worst receiving end of the unending violence are Syria's children. The next report tells you more about this.
This is what a nation that's been buried under the misery and destruction of war looks like. Amid acres of ruins are families that survived an onslaught of violence. Half-torn buildings are remnants of a normal community that was. And at the epicenter of conflict are the children of Syria, little ones whose eyes have seen violence, blood, and destruction. At an age when they were only meant to see joy and look forward to a bright future. For some of these children, their tomorrow hangs by a thread. But for many tiny hands, every last shred of hope seems to have been snatched. In the rebel-controlled city of Idlib, private school is back in session. At first glance, everything seems normal, as though beyond the school gates, there is no conflict, no violence. Only a privileged few get to enter this building and walk these hallways. handful of families that aren't financially crippled by a war-ravaged economy are funding the private schools. But for most Syrians, uprooted and impoverished, sending their children to school is a far-fetched dream. Abdul Assad is a father of 10 children. His family was displaced because of the war and they live in a refugee camp. Only 4 of his kids are able to attend school. The other 6 work a slew of jobs to support the family in these harsh times.
I don't have the means to enroll my children in private schools. It's impossible for me. People are displaced and there is no work. There is no money and very little work. 4 of my children are in school and that's costing me a lot. I hope that schools will receive more financial support so I can enroll my children there.
This isn't just Assad's story. Thousands like him are struggling to give their children basic education and ensure a better future. 16-year-old Sharif Baruch used to attend school until he was forced to drop out and work to keep his family afloat.
I used to attend school, but bombings were frequent, so we often had to go home. The bombings would resume the next morning. After that, I stopped studying and started working, then eventually returned to school. But there were more bombings. We were moving from one place to another and rents were expensive. Eventually, we couldn't afford to move anymore and I had to stop going to school. Every time I returned to school, there would be bombing.
Like Baruch, many children in Syria are forced to work and help their families survive a crippling economy. According to UN reports, 90% of the country's population is below the poverty line. While war plays a key role in creating such circumstances, whatever was left of the economy has been further destroyed by Western sanctions. In such conditions, when life and livelihood remain at risk, even hoping for affordable education sounds like a far-fetched fantasy. And thousands of Syrian children are paying the price of war as they helplessly stare at a grim life ahead.
That's all we have for you on this episode of the West Asia Post. I will see you next week with a brand new lineup, bringing you always the most recent updates, news and ground reports from the most volatile region in the world. Until then, stay safe. I am Ghadi Francis signing off from the heart of Lebanon, Beirut, and you are watching WION World is One.